Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Succah. We are on Daf Tet Zayin, Amud Aleph, by two dots in the middle of the Amud. And this is right before the last, discussing the last piece of the previous Mishnah. Right before starting the Mishnah on Tet Zayin, Amud Aleph, today's Amud is being learned as a zchut for Refuah Shelema of the girl in our community, Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, Shav Refuah Shelema, Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. Also for Refuah Shelema of Nisim Ben Miriam and Rachel Simcha Bat Nahit. This week's learning of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Shea family, the Dayan family, and the Kohen family. Should be an ultimate zchut for all of their mishpachot, Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. So this is the last piece here discussing the schach that is kasher for sukkah, or a schach that would be pasul. And the Mishnah said that hachotit begadish, if you dig inside a pile of hay, that sukkah ain't a sukkah, it's not midoraita level, it's not a sukkah, it's completely invalid. Right? And we explained the reason being, Ta'aseh, it says Chag HaSukkot Ta'aseh, and it means that the sukkah, which is a reference to the schach, has to be made l'shem schach, l'shem sukkah. You can't dig something that was not placed as a shade, and now you make a cavity inside of it, and it looks like a sukkah. It's very nice, but it's not kasher because you did not touch the schach for it to be a ceiling over anything. It just became a ceiling through you making a hole inside the gadish, and that's invalid. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna is going to say a massive chidush. Says Rav Huna, Lo shanu ela she'en sham chalal tefach b'meshech shiv'ah. We are only speaking of a scenario in which you had no space that this schach was hovering over. It was a completely closed and filled in gadish with hay everywhere. And you are the one that initiated and created a cavity inside by digging from the side into this gadish. But if you had a cavity of what is considered in Hilchot Ohel, an area of ceiling over an area that's open, then you're good to go. In other words, the minimum, and we have discussed this before, the minimum of Ohel is 1 tefach. If you have something hovering as a schach, as a ceiling over an area, which the open cavity of it is at least a tefach, that is considered an ohel. Now, it's not a kosher sukkah. It's a diras rucha until it's 10 tefachim. But ohel it is. Says Rav Huna, if you have an ohel already, so this gadish that you placed the top bundle of hay, realizing that there is an open area there, so what you put there, even though that is maybe 10 feet tall, but the bottom of it you realized that it was empty, so that was put as a schach. So it says Rav Huna,
you still wouldn't have seven tefachim.
No, so you have to have a minimum area of sukkah. It's not just a tefach on tefach, it's a tefach high. But the area of it has to be a minimum area of sukkah of 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim open. Right? So imagine you're putting these bundles and you put one on top of the other two, and you have this area with a height of a tefach open. Okay. So you have that, and now you're digging down according to Ran's understanding in his Girsa in Rashi, or you're digging up according to Ramban and others, right? Doesn't make much of a difference digging up, down, but you're now digging to complete this to 10 tefachim from 1 tefach. That's good, says Rav Huna. It's chiddush, right? The Ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui, Rashi explains, Ta'aseh min ha'asui is only the halacha on schach, not on the fanut. Like we spoke about this when we did Daf Dalet, we spoke about this again when we did the Mishnah here, that when you have a schach, but you have a technical problem with the schach is too low, or it's too high, and then I have to fix the walls, make the walls shorter or longer, the cavity less or more, that is not a fault, it's not a problem of Ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. Ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui is a problem primarily regarding the schach. You can't make a schach from digging other things when you're not touching the schach. But here, when you put the schach, the cavity was there, you realize that this is now ma'ahil, this is now hovering around this area of 7 by 7 in the height of 1 tefach, which is ohel. And I can live in that ohel, right? But it is an ohel nevertheless. So says the Gemara, that is the chidush of Rav Huna. Lo shanu ela she'en sham chalal tefach b'meshech shiv'ah. The only time that's not a sukkah is when you don't have a cavity open of 7 by 7 in height of at least 1 tefach. But if you do have that, hare ze sukkah. Your sukkah is kasher if you added to dig to complete the shiur of your sukkah, and now you made a nice 20 feet by 20 feet in the height of 10 foot, a nice beautiful sukkah, the whole thing is kasher. Because you originally started with the shiur of sukkah on a height of tefach, which is an ohel. So says the Gemara, Tanya Lamehachi, we learned in the Braita also like this, indicating the same halacha. HaChotet b'kadish la'asot lo sukkah, harei ze sukkah. Can you believe it? It's exactly opposite of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says HaChotet b'kadish la'asot lo sukkah ena sukkah. The Braita says it is sukkah, the same exact language, right? It's like a checkmate opposite. So well, how does that work? How can you go against, the Braita is going against the Mishnah directly. Our Mishnah says it's not a sukkah. And the Braita says, HaChotet b'kadish la'asot lo sukkah, harei ze sukkah. And says the Gemara, we learned in our Mishnah, ena sukkah, ela lav shmamina, keda Rav Huna shmamina. You see from this, like the halacha of Rav Huna, that there is a case that you could be chotet b'kadish, you're digging inside a pile of hay, and it's good. What is the case? The case is, like Rav Huna said, you have a minimum shiur of sukkah 7 by 7 in the height of at least 1 tefach, and you're good to go. And the Gemara says there are some actually that say this as the process, the thought process of Rav Huna himself. That this whole process of asking the question from the Braita and answering the halacha was done by Rav Huna himself. Says the Gemara, Ika derami lehmirma. There are those who ask it as a question answer before learning the halacha of Rav Huna. And Rav Huna is basically the one going through it. Says the Gemara, on one hand, Tanana chotet b'kadish la'asot lo sukkah ena sukkah. On one hand, we have our Mishnah. If you dig inside the kadish, it's not a sukkah. And the Gemara says, V'ha'tanya, and we know that we have a Braita that is not like that. V'ha'tanya, we learned in Braita, harei ze sukkah. It is a kasher sukkah. Amar Rav Huna is stepping in to answer this question. Not that Rav Huna said the halacha and then we are figuring out a support from the Braita, but Rav Huna was doing this. He said, we have our Mishnah, we have a Braita, what's the answer? That's Rav Huna's answer. Rav Huna says, Lo kasha, it's not a question, it's not a stira. Kan v'sheyes sham chalal tefach b'meshech shiv'ah. The Braita is speaking about a scenario in which you have already an open area with the height of tefach and the area of 7 by 7, the minimum amount of sukkah. Kan b'she'en sham chalal tefach b'meshech shiv'ah. Our Mishnah is talking about the case that you don't have that area open, and therefore, ena sukkah. Now, we end basically with this, discussing a few Mishnayot that we have had on what is considered a schach that's kasher, right? Can you have mekabel tumah? Can you not have mekabel tumah? How high? How big? How thick? How thin? Right? You know, doing it with mats, with bamboo mats, with the branches of of an ilan with a vine connected to the ground. Now, it's all discussions of Sukkah. Now, time to move a little bit to the defanot. What are considered kasher defanot? Says the Mishnah. Hameshalshel defanot milemala lemata. We're going to be talking about two scenarios in our Mishnah that you don't have a complete wall. You either have a wall that starts from the ceiling and ends in the middle somewhere hovering, or starts from the ground and ends somewhere in the middle, also not completing the job. So in other words, we all understand that if you made a cement wall, top to bottom, sealed and shot, that's a wall. Okay. How about if you have a creative wall? It's hovering, it's halfway in the middle of the sukkah, or just in the top, or just in the bottom, right? The rest of the area is completely open. Is that kasher? So it says the Mishnah, if you start from the top, from the ceiling, and you come down, if you have more than shloshat fachim, let's call it 9 inches, 10 inches. If you have more than shloshat fachim from the ground open, it's pasul. It's not considered a wall. Milemata lemala.
Essentially, it says pasul. It doesn't say in a sukkah.
Okay. Milemata lemala. Good question. Milemata lemala. If you down up, right? Im gavoa asarat fachim. If your wall is 10 fachim tall, you're good. Kasher. Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the premise of the Mishnah. Keshem shelemata lemala asarat fachim, just like if you are working your way up from the ground with asarat fachim is sufficient, the same would be from top to bottom. If you have milemala lemata, starting from the roof, coming down, asarat fachim is also kasher. That's Rabbi Yossi. Now, we are very biased when we learn this Mishnah because we kind of know the basic halachot of the walls of Sukkah, right? We know, three tfachim, we know all these things, right? But the obvious question discussed in the Gemara over here is, what exactly is the svara of Rabbi Yossi? You have like a hanging wall, and he says it's kasher. As long as you have 10 tfachim somewhere, it's kasher, right? It's like almost like the discussion that we had before by gud achit, right? That when you have a width of a tefach, either way, you have an imaginary wall coming down, right? But it's more than that because we're not just imagining it. You have to have, according to Rabbi Yossi, 10 tefachim, which is worth of a wall. Right? A mechitza has to be 10 tefachim. That's the halachot of mechitza. So he says you do need a mechitza. So it's not that you're using a halakha Moshe Misinai creative imaginary mechitza of gud achit, that you imagine that this comes down. No, you actually need a 10 tefachim solid mechitza, but it's hovering in the air somewhere. So what exactly is the yesod, the understanding of Rabbi Yossi? And the Gemara is going to suggest that this is a concept that we are familiar with other places in Shas as a mechitza tluya, a hovering, a hanging mechitza, right? Says the Gemara. But my kamifrigi, what is the core element of the machloket Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi? And says the Gemara, Mor savar mechitza tluya materet. One of them holds that a mechitza that's hanging, that's hovering, is good enough and is matir, it's considered a mechitza. Umor savar mechitza tluya ena matiret. The other one holds that no, in order for a mechitza to be acting as a dividing wall, it has to be a solid wall. Fine, says the Gemara, Tanan Hatam, we learned in the Mishnah in Masechet Eruvin. Now, this is talking about Eruvei Chatzerot, which means if me and you live in two different courtyards, we cannot carry from one courtyard on Shabbat to the other unless we have made Eruvei Chatzerot, unless we have announced halachically that our two domains are really one. we are sharing the same domain. We have to put food for it, and so on and so forth. That's the sugya in Masechet Eruvin. Now, what happens if you have a well made between the two chaserot? That was a prevalent thing because everyone needed source of water, right? So having a well in your courtyard, by the way, would be considered like a gold mine, right? Because otherwise the alternative was you have to walk, and I don't know when was the last time you schlepped water. Water is one of the heaviest things, right? So this was, to wash and to have drinking water was a gold mine. So when you had a well, you would make sure that as many chaserot could share this, because the real estate would go up. So you have this well, and you made two chaserot, and this is smack in the middle. There's a wall going over the top of the well, right? To clearly divide the two chaserot from each other. The question is, can I put my bucket inside on Shabbat and from my own side take water? And the answer is absolutely not. You can't, because you're carrying the water which is in a mushkababo reshut, right? It's mixed, because we haven't done. If you do eruv chaserot, there's no question. No question. If you haven't done eruv chaserot, it's asur for you to put a bucket and take water to your domain. Now the Gemara there is discussing, how about if I make some creative mechitza inside the cavity of this well? Obviously we can't go mechitza all the way down, but 10 tfachim, right? Shiur av mechitza. Shiur av mechitza, and it's inside the cavity of the well, inside the perimeters of the well, below the circumference of the top. But it's only 10 tfachim in hanging in there, right? This is the discussion in Masechet Eruvin, right? And the Gemara is going to try to connect these two together. So says the Gemara, Bor shben shte chaserot. If you have a well that is smack in the middle of two chaserot, two different courtyards, en memalein mimena v'shabbat, if you have not done eruve chaserot, you cannot fill in water in your bucket and pull it out to your chatzer, unless you have a mechitza going down inside the well between the two chaserot, and it's 10 tfachim tall. So says the Gemara, ben milemala, ben milemata, ben betoch ogno, which means it doesn't make a difference if your mechitza is up above, starting right from the start, the ground level going down, right? We're not talking about the wall going between, right, of the two chaserot. That doesn't count, says the Gemara. It could be the mechitza is from the well down, if this is your well, starting from here, going down, or even though that the water starts here, right? Or it could be somewhere in the middle, not starting from the top, it's closer to the water level. Doesn't make a difference. As long as you have 10 tfachim tall mechitza inside the cavity, and that's when it says the third thing, ben betoch ogno, Rashi says doesn't mean a third category. It means as long as it is inside the perimeters of the well, in the open cavity of the well. So says the Gemara, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says this is machloket bet Shammai and bet Hillel. Bet Shammai omrim milemala, u bet Hillel omrim milemata. Bet Shammai hold it has to be up above from the start get-go of the well down, and Bet Hillel say no, milemata, closer. It has to be closer to the level of water inside the well. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Now this Rabbi Yehuda is what we want. Rabbi Yehuda said, wait a second. Lo tehe mechitza gedola mina kotel shebeneni. He says, now you know what's the best mechitza? The wall that's going on top of the well between the two chaserot. That's like a solid wall that differentiates between the two chaserot. Now it's a hovering, so to speak, mechitza. It's hanging in the air, literally. But it's a mechitza. So says the Gemara. The Gemara wants to suggest that this is the machloket in our Mishnah as well. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda b'shitat Rabbi Yossi Amara. Rabbi Yehuda, who says the wall between the two courtyards is considered the wall for Shabbat as well, to draw water from the well, so long as you do it from your own side. He holds like the Rabbi Yossi of Masechet Sukkah Daf Tet Zayin Amud Aleph. That's what says Rabbah. Rabbah says that is the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. Because Rabbi Yossi is the one that says a hovering mechitza on top above is good. It's coming from the top of Sukkah, and it only comes down 10 tefachim, it's good. You don't need any mechitzot down there. That's the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Da'amar mechitza teluya materet. Rabbi Yossi is the one that says mechitza teluya is good. The Gemara says no, velohi, it's not correct. Lo Rabbi Yossi savar la lo Rabbi Yehuda savar la Rabbi Yossi, velo Rabbi Yossi savar la Rabbi Yehuda. None of them holds like the other one. How so? Says the Gemara, lo Rabbi Yehuda savar la Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda does not agree with Rabbi Yossi because ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yehuda atav ela be'eruv chatzerot. Rabbi Yehuda was only saying this in eruv chatzerot, which is a concept the Rabbanan. Especially by water, we are super mekel, right? You study the Rishonim here. By water specifically, a mechitza that's made for water, we spoke about pasei biraot before. When it came to water, we're extra mekel, but the whole concept is midrabanan, right? But sukkah, to say that sukkah is going to be kasher, oy vavoy, that you're talking about the mitzvah d'oraita over here, right? Rabbi Yehuda would never dare say like Rabbi Yossi. Doesn't hold like him. It's d'oraita? No. Says the Gemara, our hachat sukkah d'oraita lo. Velo Rabbi Yossi savar like Rabbi. Rabbi Yossi also doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda because ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yossi hacha ela besukkah de mitzvah aseh. Here sukkah is mitzvah aseh. Mitzvah aseh is more kal. Shabbat is isur karet. Mitat bedin, right? It's serious stuff. So even though that we're talking about the Drabanan case of Shabbat, but the whole Ilchot Shabbat is so much more chamur that even the Drabanans is ken deoraita tiknu. We're very machmir when it comes to Shabbat. Our Shabbat is sekila. No, we don't mess with Ilchot Shabbat to be mekel, even on a rabbinic level. Ve'im tomar, and if you want to say Maseh Shenasa beSipori al Pima, the Gemara is going to bring a story that happened in Sipori. And Sipori, who was the Rav Harashi of Sipori? Rabbi Yossi, right? So he says, well, there was a story about Shabbat carrying in the chaser on Shabbat with a mechitza that was hovering, hanging, and apparently the Rav of town allowed it. Who was the Rav of town? Rabbi Yossi, right? Says the Gemara, no. Lo al pi Rabbi Yossi, ela al pi Rabbi Shmael be Rabbi Yossi. It was not Rabbi Yossi. It was after Rabbi Yossi passed away. You know who was the rabbi? Rabbi Shmael be Rabbi Yossi was the Rav. And he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. He has a mind of his own, and therefore he paskin, but not Rabbi Yossi. Now what is this story? The story was like this. Umay Maseh. What's the story? The Chiata Rabdimi Amar, when Rabdimi came from Eretz Yisrael, said the story that happened in Sipori. Pamachat, shachechu v'lo heviu Sefer Torah me'erev Shabbat. They used to hide the Sefer Torah, and Bet Knesset was Reshut HaRabim, everyone would come in, and the Aron Kodesh was not safe. So you put the Sefer Torah there, who knows what's going to be there, if it's going to be still there tomorrow morning, right? So during the week, they would keep it in one of the houses, residentials, in the same Chatzir, and Erev Shabbat, before Shabbat, they would bring it in the Aron Kodesh and lock it in. Then for those few hours, it would be safe. And they forgot one Shabbat to bring it from Erev Shabbat. Shabbat morning, they're scratching their heads, saying, there's no Eruv Chatzerot, what are we going to do now? Right? The Machar, Pirsus Sadin, they spread the cloth, the Sadin, on the railing, and it happened to be like a walkway from the house to the Bet Knesset, and they allowed to bring the Sefer Torah. Al Gabe Hamudi ve'eviu Sefer Torah. They brought ve'karuba, and they read. The Gemara says, wait a second, Pirsus al Gadatach? You think they spread the mechitza? Where did they bring it? How can they carry the cloth to bring it? He says, no. They found it that it was already spread, right? They were like, oh, Mina Shamayim Hashgacha Pratit. This sedinin are hovering. That's a mechitza tluya. Says the Gemara, Matz'u sedinin perusin. They found this sedinin to be already spread, and it had created a walkway between them. Ve'heviu Sefer Torah ve'karuba. And Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yossi allowed them because this was a mechitza tluya, and Rabbi Shmuel held, like Rabbi Yehuda, even for Shabbat. that you could do, you could rely legabe eruvei chatzerot even on Shabbat on the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, and he held like that. It's not really a Shita of Rabbi Yossi. Now this is going to segue into another connection, a connected Gemara to this, which Be'ezrat Hashem we will discuss and continue in the days to come. Hazak Baruch.